So many people have drawn my attention to this ABC article that has been released, how Australian coral became big business. Now this article is unfortunately written with a lot of biases, and I'll go through and unpack some of this for you. So if you wanted to make the industry look bad, then this has done a pretty good job, and it has cherry-picked some very minor examples to totally misrepresent what is otherwise a very well-kept reef. What Australia has done and the way Australia is going about our conservation is a credit to the world. Now, various countries have pillaged their reef, and various countries have done a terrible job with coral conservation. But on the other hand, Australia has done a very good job. Now, I've been involved in the Australian coral trade since 1994, and I have made in excess of 20 visits to the Great Barrier Reef, and I've gone out many times with divers, and I have absolute first-hand experience understanding the full chain of custody for the Australian coral industry. I've also done numerous trips to many places overseas, and I am very accurately able to compare the exemplary standards that we have in Australia and compare them to some of the absolutely terrible standards that some of the world engages in. Now, Australia gets tarred with the same brush as other countries that are not doing the right thing. For example, when Senator Hill was in, he was watching a 60 Minutes program about some of the atrocities that occur on coral reefs. He then used his position to close the Great Barrier Reef. And then after a lot of action from the industry itself, it ended up becoming completely apparent that the way Australia deal with our coral reef is actually world standard, and that the program that he was watching that made him decide to take that drastic action was actually shot at and filmed and all about what goes on in the Philippines, which has absolutely nothing to do with Australia. So this topic is a very emotive topic. Lots of emotions run high, but we need to look at fact. We cannot go on ideology, because there are many sides to everything. And if you want to take the view that you take a coral from the ocean and the coral dies and therefore it has degraded the reef and served for no other value, then you can take that view. On the other hand, removing a coral from an environment is no different from removing a tree from a forest. If you remove one tree here and one tree there, all that does is create more space for other things to occupy. But if you go and clear it, then suddenly that is a problem. But in Australia, coral clearing really isn't a thing. Cherry picking amongst the corals is basically how it goes on. And if you remove one here and then one over there, all it does is create space for others to actually grow. Now, the media loves headlines and the media loves scare campaigns. Just like the bleaching events, the coral reef has various very real stresses that we need to be aware of, and things that we do have to manage, and that Australia all in all does a very good job of. But we cannot underestimate the coral reef's ability to survive. For example, an Australian bush is designed to weather bushfires. Now, not only does the Australian bush weather bushfires, the Australian bush actually thrives due to bushfires. So when there's a fire in the Australian bush, if you go back to that same bush 5 years later, you will find more diversity and you'll find less invasive species. Any area not hit by a bushfire tends to have less diversity and tends to have a lot more problem with invasive species. And just like the Australian bush has evolved to handle various stresses, so has the Great Barrier Reef. So if you go to an area which has been bleached, then you will see visible stress. You will see problems as a result of the bleaching. But if you go back 6 months to even 12 months later, you'll find that reef is potentially healthier than others. And cyclones and crown of thorn starfish and all these other things that have been touted as destroying the reef, they never do. Because the reef only ever has done one thing. It's evolved, it's moved, it's changed, it's grown, it's contracted, it's done all sorts of things. But the one thing it does do is survive. And there are various reefs that you could have gone to after a bleaching event and you could think this was terrible, and it was. But then you can go back to that same reef 6 to 12 months later and it can be in unbelievable condition because of its natural ability to weather these sorts of events and to evolve and thrive. Okay, so the first thing it says here is Australia's Great Barrier Reef is being literally chipped away at to build private aquariums. Now conservationists are raising the alarm. Well, you will never have a problem finding a conservationist that wants to get upset about something. This is absolutely a given. And once again, if the collectors were going down there and chipping coral after coral after coral after coral, then this statement may ring true. But the reality is that the way they collect in Australia is actually highly regulated, and it is actually completely sustainable. Now, I'm not saying that everyone does the right thing, and sometimes people get caught doing the wrong thing, and these people need to be dealt with by law, and these people do not represent the industry, because I am personal friends with a lot of these people, and I can tell you now that they have long-term visions for their industry, and they play by the rules. And the thing is, if you're going to do the wrong thing in Australia, you're actually going to get caught, because the checks and balances that they put in are significant. So I am not condoning anyone that's doing the wrong thing. I'm also not naive enough to say that nobody's doing the wrong thing, because that's just not a reality. There is the odd person doing the wrong thing. And this video is not here to defend those people. This video is here to defend the industry. Because here in Australia, we should be very proud of the way we're managing our Great Barrier Reef. Now, there are things that are happening to the reef which are outside of our control. But let me assure you, the Great Barrier Reef is not dying. The Great Barrier Reef is thriving. Actually, last year, it had the largest coral cover and best distribution ever. Now, do you read about that in the media? No, because the media pushing these globalist agendas only like to promote the terrible stories, because obviously they sell papers better. So, for example, I used to go out with collectors, and I'd go to a single atoll, and the collector that I was with said, look, I have collected here for 17 years, and you find me one place that I've removed a coral. And you literally couldn't even find anywhere, because corals grow so much faster than you think they do. And if there's a little bit of space here or a little bit of space there, because one coral's removed here and one coral's removed there, then all that does is just allow the corals around it to grow. Because the corals all having coddy poisonous cells and so forth, and when the corals are close to each other, they sting each other for competition. And when there's a little bit of space, that allows them to grow much faster and occupy that space. So to think that we're chipping away the reef, well, technically that's true. But the way they're doing it, taking one from over here and one from over there, is completely sustainable. Even to the point that I can go to a single atoll and not see anywhere that a coral has been removed, despite the fact that it has been cautiously collected from by one person for 17 years. The way that they do these headlines are very, very deceptive, but unfortunately accurate in a worst case scenario, but not representative of the industry. Now, here is some very factual information put in a way to make something very good sound very bad. So it says, despite the perilous state of the Great Barrier Reef, the government allows private companies to harvest coral from it. There are limits and penalties for fishermen who take too much are severe. Yes, the government does allow private companies to harvest the coral. And yes, there's limits. And yes, there is severe penalties. So I don't know why you're framing that as a bad thing. That's a good thing. And then it goes on to say, but the reefs are literally chipped away to build private aquariums around the world. Okay. Concerns are growing for the practice could be adding one stress too many to the ecosystem. Well, once again, because they are removed sustainably and because Australia looks after our Great Barrier Reef very well, I think this was a badly written little paragraph to make something that we should be proud of look bad. Researchers have even said coral harvesting, which targets the most colourful varieties, might even drain some coral colonies of colour. Now, I'm pretty sure there's no evidence at all of that, because often the colour of the coral is very much related to a lot of the conditions that are present. For example, we can get a coral into our aquarium, which is very colourful, and it can totally lose its colour because of the conditions present. We also can get corals that have got no colour, and we can put them in our coral aquarium and we can make them very colourful just by providing the right conditions, minor and trace elements and so forth. So if we're able to manipulate our colour in the environment, then the corals in the environment would also be able to be manipulated. That isn't really true, because the colour of a coral is various pigments and reactions to zooxanthellae, and it is the case that a coral can easily change colour. So if you say, oh, they're removing the bright red corals, there's not going to be any more bright red corals. That isn't true, because often, if the conditions are right for your red coral to become a bright red coral, then it becomes a bright red coral. If the conditions, let's say your phosphates and nitrates are up too high or whatever, you'll lose a lot of your colours and they go brown. So it's not like they have a skin colour. It is that the corals are reacting to various conditions and the colour of the coral is able to change. Now it says, it doesn't help that one of Australia's biggest coral harvesters is currently facing criminal prosecution for illegal harvesting coral from protected areas in the Great Barrier Reef. And once again, I am not condoning anyone doing the wrong thing. And our government is very good at finding people doing the wrong thing. And you cannot tarnish the wonderful reputation of our industry by bad players. You've got to find the bad players. You don't destroy the industry. Australia's coral harvest industry has even attracted bans from the European Union and the United Kingdom over concerns about sustainability. Now that statement just then pretty much made it look like they're banning corals. But it appears that there are 5 species of coral that they are concerned about, and that may have very good reason for that. So if there are a few species that maybe don't fare well in the transport, or maybe there are valid reasons for those 5 corals not to be imported into the EU or the UK. So that statement pretty much tarred the brush of that statement made the whole industry look bad for 5 individual species, when potentially not bringing those 5 species to the UK or EU may have actually been a very good idea, and absolutely no representation on the rest of the reef. Now, I know that some corals don't transport well, and for example, the grubrescens is one of them. So if it doesn't transport well, and they've got concerns for this particular coral, then maybe they shouldn't import that coral into the EU and the UK. But I know they get other corals very well and very successfully. And once again, the craze within the coral keeping is all about fragging and all about sustainability anyway. So in some cases, individual species have found their way to Great Britain or the UK, and a lot of the hobbyists have done such a good job in propagating them that not only have they propagated them and sold them fluently within the UK and the EU, they're actually even creating their own colours and their own types of various Australian corals. So there's a lot of very good work done within the aquarium industry. And once again, it is possible that there can be issues with the Great Barrier Reef, and we could lose species, and then there could be thousands, tens of thousands or whatever of that same species safe in people's aquariums, which later could be introduced. And there are examples of that, where various types of fish, coral and so forth have been wiped out in the wild, but due to abundance in our aquariums, they are not lost. So you can make all this stuff sound doomy and gloomy, but there's also another side, because you're dealing with people that love their animals, people that look after their animals. Now, that's not to say there's bad nuts, because there is, but there's also a lot of wonderfulness that comes out of the aquarium industry. And having these aquariums is what gives people the passion and the desire to look after them in the wild. Now it says, but none of this has slowed the world's appetite for Australian coral. Of course it's not going to, because Australia is one of the most sustainable and high quality fisheries you can buy from. So of course people want to buy Australian, because Australians look after it. Now it says stewards versus scientists. Some government organisations, such as the Australian Marine Conservative Society, want to end coral harvesting on the reef altogether. Now, I'm sure that you could speak to someone within that organisation and get that opinion, but I'm sure that you would find many people in that organisation that do not share that opinion. This isn't a fishery that solves problems with food security or something. No, it's not. But it certainly does increase awareness and people's passion and drive to solve the real conservation issues. This is a global aquarium trade. Yep. Campaign manager Simon Miller says. Then they've just got a guy here looking very unhappy with a bunch of bleached coral. Now, no one's happy about bleached coral. And in the aquarium industry, we do everything we can to sell live, healthy, thriving corals. And unfortunately, occasionally they die. But as far as the white bleached coral trade is concerned, Australia hasn't engaged in that for quite some time. And bleached dead coral is something very frowned upon in the industry. And no one collects corals for the purpose of bleaching anymore, because it wouldn't be worth it, because the Australian government makes it too expensive and too unsustainable to go selling part of your license quota on dead stuff. So that's not even a factor anymore. So coral scientist Dr. Morgan Pritchett says the industry has flown under the radar because of its negligible size. Well, yes, compared to other industries, the aquarium industry is absolutely minute. Now, one single cyclone would wipe out way more coral than the industry would in a year. One single putting down of your anchor would destroy more coral than a acarist would. Increasing threats to the reef, he says widespread support for the industry that the industry has enjoyed is unlikely to continue. Absolutely false. Now, if lots of disinformation like this keeps getting put out, then you can upset lots of people and fill them with disinformation, and you can make that true. But the reality is that the Australian coral reef is looked after very well, and it is completely sustainable. So therefore, this statement is just scaremongering. So it says, we're now saying, well, hang on, given the state of the reef, maybe we should rethink the industry, he says. Yes, and the industry is constantly looking at itself. It is constantly looking at how to do things better and more effectively. And because ultimately, if we sell coral that stays alive, we sell coral. If we sell coral that dies, then people stop buying it pretty damn quick. And we need to keep doing a better job. That's what we need to do. We need to keep improving it, because it does bring money into the industry, into the country, and it does increase the awareness. So people with a coral reef are more likely to be involved in looking after the reef than someone that doesn't. So now it says, unlike the Australian Marine Conservation Society, he's not calling for a total ban. He does, however, want the industry to provide some data to prove it's sustainable. Good. I think the more we get data, the more we work with the industry, and the more we prove its sustainability, and the more we rat out the people doing the wrong job, then the better. Now we've got a lovely photo of Lyle Squire. Lyle Squires Jr.'s grandfather was one of the first to display marine life from the Great Barrier Reef in an aquarium in Cairns. Now, lots of people have commented to me, Lyle's a very good friend of mine. And now they've said, why has Lyle got a photo of himself in the background? That's not him. That's his grandfather. That's not him. So anyway, you can believe that's Lyle with a photo of himself in the background if you want. But no, he doesn't. He's proud of his grandfather. He's not standing proud in front of a photo of him, picture of himself. But let's pretend he did. Okay. But Lyle Squire Jr., a third-generation coral collector and owner of the biggest coral harvesting operation on the Great Barrier Reef, Cairns Marine, doesn't agree. We are stewards, he said. We're not out to destroy the reef. He believes the industry has minimal impact on the reef. Now, if anyone's going to know, it's this guy. He is a very passionate, very knowledgeable steward of the reef. And he is very interested in the long-term sustainability of his industry. And he does a lot to ensure and influence the long-term sustainability of this industry. So he's someone that actually would know. I could not, in good faith, look myself in the mirror knowing that my grandfather, coral harvesting, my grandfather's licenses are something that I'm abusing and I'm not providing an outcome at the end for my children's children to be able to go on and enjoy the environment. He says, well, absolutely. And I think this guy would be very proud of this guy, because I think he's doing a great job of trying to make sure that the industry, I like the way surely they could have got him in focus. So they've put him out of focus there. Surely you could have put him in focus. So with blurry Lyle here, I think he's doing exactly that. He's doing everything he can to run his business in a way that this guy would be proud. So all these do-gooders that want to make this guy look bad, have a look again, because if you want to make this guy look bad, cool. You can make him look bad. You can make him blurry. You could do whatever you want to him. But the more you get to know him, the more you realize that he's doing a lot to try and make sure the industry is long-term sustainable and that there is an industry for his children and children's children. So what's a little propaganda we've got here going? Coral is protected globally under CITES. Now, here's another conversation we can have. Now, Australia copped some criticism on the handling of the Great Barrier Reef, particularly due to some bleaching events. Now, mind you, those bleaching events, they're very terrible at the time, but within 6 to 12 months, those same reefs look absolutely thriving. I know because I go up and see them. I was up at a reef that was completely bleached about 12 months after it was bleached, and there was no evidence whatsoever of bleaching. The coral takes on its zooxanthellae, brings all its colour back after the temperature goes down, and continues thriving. Now, Australia was going to hand over the management of the Great Barrier Reef to CITES as a reaction to Chinese criticism. And Australia actually put together an advisory board. As I understand, at the start of that convention, they had a vote, and majoritively, the delegates at this convention, which were responsible for advising the government, had said, yes, we should hand it over to CITES. We should do the right thing. Then various people, including Anthony Ramsey from the PIAA, Pet Industry Association of Australia, took aside a lot of these people and had one-on-one chats with them. And not only did they not understand a lot of the facts, that most of them actually changed their mind. And besides there being a lot of presentations and so forth on why we should handle the management over to CITES, in the end, they resoundingly voted to not. Because if we'd handed our management over to CITES, it means that they would have CITES listed all our fish and coral, which means our industry would have evaporated. And lots of jobs and lots of money for a potentially sustainable industry would be completely lost. Just like while I was over in Hawaii, and there were signs up basically saying that we're saving the fish, and there was a party that wanted to save the endemic fish, and then they closed the whole Hawaiian reefs, and billions of dollars have been lost, and none of the fish were even in danger. Because PIJAC, the American version of the PIAA, had identified a bunch of species of concern. They had put in their own regulations, and for something like 13 years, the abundance studies had basically said that all of these species are at natural abundance and they are not endangered. So politics and trying to get the green vote is very big here, but we need to do it on fact. Because you know what? No one cares about the Great Barrier Reef. No one cares about the reefs more than aquarists. We want to represent these animals in our aquariums, and we want these animals thriving in the wild. And you know what? We can propagate them. So you give us one, we can turn them into lots. It is a wonderful and sustainable industry. Here at Majestic Aquariums, we have propagated thousands and thousands of corals. And there are thousands of people out there that are propagating thousands of corals. So we are able to, just like someone could give you a plant, and you can grow that plant, and you can create many plants from that plant. That's what we do. Australia exports more than $25 million worth of coral according to the Queensland government, making it one of the world's biggest players. Most of those exports end up in the United States. On top of all that international trade, there are also domestic market. Yes. Now, Australia sells our corals at a prime money because they are prime quality, and that is money coming into Australia, which Australia needs. And once again, when people are playing by the rules and when the corals are removed sustainably, this is a wonderful advantage for Australia. Now, when people don't play by the rules and people do things that are damaging, that is not what I'm defending. Inside the reefing business, it's a market Acrist Andre Cavell supplies from his online coral business run from his home in Sydney. All right, good on you, buddy. Hello, Andre. All of Andre's stock is harvested directly from wild colonies grown on the Great Barrier Reef. He says his customers are like any other pet owner. It's basically a piece of the ocean in their home, he says. It's an incredible piece of artwork. You can switch the telly off and sit back and watch the fish with the little critters and the corals and the way they grow. Yeah. I mean, and look at Andre's corals. They all look beautiful and healthy and thriving and growing. See that there? It means it's growing all over the frag plug. By the look at that, Andre has some beautiful, thriving, growing coral. Yep, good on you, Andre. Oh, yeah, I know Andre, actually. Oh, hello, Andre. Yeah, I know you. You look like you're doing a good job, dude. Andre sells corals from the Great Barrier Reef. And now, once again, by the look of his setup, he propagates a lot of coral. So what they're saying he does is he gets one coral, he turns it into potentially tens or hundreds of corals, and then he sells them. Awesome. That's the sort of stuff we should be celebrating, not putting in a scare piece. This should be stuff we're proud of. But the hobby isn't always so relaxed. Reefing, as it's known, is competitive. Well, so is everything. The hobby boasts its own influencers on YouTube who make a living from their ever-expanding home reefs. Yes, and do you know what these people do on YouTube? They teach people how to keep them. They teach people how to respect them. There's some awesome influencers out there, and they do a great job of trying to allow people to understand how beautiful these animals are, to appreciate them, and how to look after them, and how to conserve them. Even I do that. Aside from being sold in classic fish shops and online, small pieces of coral or frags grown by collectors are also sold at rave-like trade shows known as frag swaps, with names such as Reefapalooza, Aquashella, and Fragorama. Well, yes, these events are wonderful events, and these events encourage that people know what they're doing, and good, that's all good. Very happy with all that. These coral frags often are ecstasy-like street names: Bubbles, Candy Cane, Cherry Blossom, Frog Spawn, and so on. Yep. Prices range anywhere from $30 for a tiny frag to $1,000 for a larger mother colony. Yep. My all-time favorite would have to be the Golden Torch, says Andre. Yes, but Andre senses trouble for the industry. To you, Andre. Because of concerns about harvesting wild coral from the reef, there is a push for the industry to move towards aquaculture. Yes, that is absolutely true. Coral grown in tanks. Now, lots of people are aware of the naivety of many Greens and many green voting people that want to ban the coral reef for no good reason. They want to ban it because of ideology. Now, I am totally against unsustainable harvest, and I don't believe that. I believe in general, I think Australia's doing an excellent job. So we don't have a big problem, but you will always find a bad apple, and they need to be dealt with. It's long been touted by wild coral harvesters as the solution for their industry. Well, absolutely, because coral fragging is actually very easy and very cheap and very good and very sustainable. So why wouldn't we do it? And of course, there's concerns about what if some fruitcake comes and bans the collection on the coral reef, or what if we do get some really bad players that deserve that? Well, the way that Australia has been set up is that those bad players do get found out, and they do get kicked out, and they do get fined. And I think what Australia is doing is very, very good. So if you read this the wrong way, then this whole lot could look bad. But I think Andre's done a pretty good job. It's all pretty factual. Now there's a bunch of people hanging out looking at corals with unlocking the secrets of coral reproduction. You know what? That's another good thing. You know that there's so many companies, universities, and stuff that are doing absolutely wonderful jobs with coral propagation, clam propagation. It should be like a good feel story, not a bad headlines. Why do you put bad headlines when most of this material is actually really great, unless you interpret it wrong? The problem is that growing coral is tricky. Well, yes and no. As you get more experience, a lot of the corals grow like weeds. It's not that tricky. Some are harder than others. Even Australia's top scientists are yet to crack the secret to coral reproduction on a large scale. Well, they're certainly making a lot of progress, and if we ban corals being collected, then our progress stops. But there is absolutely wonderful progress. For a species like Acropora, which grows quite quickly, aquaculture may work just fine, but it will be bon voyage for those much loved scollies or torches. Yeah, well, that's right. If they ban collection, then there are various species that would absolutely suffer, and it would also mean that we don't get to master those species like we have other species. But with optimism, some companies are pressing ahead. Of course, they're pressing ahead because we're doing a wonderful job of, like, even in the last 5 to 10 years, the amount of progress that the industry has had and how much more species we can propagate is really getting impressive. One of those coral farms located in Cairns, run by a trio of aquarists, Rick, Christian and Shane. When Rick and Christian first got into the coral business, they were harvesting from the Great Barrier Reef. According to Rick, they saw the writing on the wall and believed it was no longer sustainable to harvest wild corals. Now, I think that is very biasly written. Now, these guys are very talented, very passionate, and very capable coral fraggers. And they are doing an excellent job. Now, the fact that they are perfecting their art of coral collection would not for 1 second suggest that they agree with banning coral collection. But they would very much agree with unsustainable practices. Their company is called Sustainable Reefs, for God's sake. So the way that they are writing this would give anyone the impression that these guys see the writing on the wall and want to build a business because they don't believe in coral collection. And that could not be further from the truth, especially considering they were coral collectors or even are coral collectors. But these guys they need to write that to celebrate these guys. These guys should be celebrated. They shouldn't be written in a way that makes you think that they don't agree with coral collection. Because really what these guys are doing is an absolute credit to them and our industry. And they're really, they're doing it. They're propagating coral. We should be celebrating these guys, not putting them in an article that make them look bad. The same as Andre. He looks to be doing a great job to me. He's got corals clearly growing onto the frags. Then we've got Lyle Squire, an absolute role model. And these are the guys we should be celebrating. This guy, he's a cool picture. So why you've got all of these people in a headline to make the industry look bad, here with this grumpy looking bozo. And if we had coral that had bleached, we'd look like this guy too. We wouldn't be happy either. Because we're not out to kill coral, we're out to grow it and collect it sustainably. So here we've got the Sharpshooter. That's one of the Cairns Marine boats. Now, mind you, this is a state-of-the-art boat. I've been over to Indonesia and some of the places where they collect in a canoe with a hammer, a chisel, and a bucket. They throw all the corals in a bucket and they take it to a collection station where it just gets chucked in a tank with an air bubbler in it. In Australia, we collect using state-of-the-art collection techniques. We put onto state-of-the-art collection boats and we take it to state-of-the-art collection stations, and then we ship using state-of-the-art collection or shipping techniques, which is the envy of the world. And that's why our corals are not cheap, because we do it the best. And we in the industry should be very, very proud of what we're doing. Give us a smile, buddy. Smile, yeah, there's a good smile. You deserve to smile. Putting in a piece like this that initially looks bad, but then when you read it and you actually look at what's being said, you know, we should be proud of ourselves in this industry. We shouldn't be a part of a stress piece like this. We should be celebrating what we're doing. Okay, so here we go. It took them 2 years to transition to an aquaculture business, and even now there are times where they have no choice but to buy coral from harvesters. Yes, because they need new things to conquer, because they are conquering what they're doing. Rick believes the industry's future is aquaculture. Yes, because you know what? As an industry, we want to be sustainable, and Rick is right. A lot of the industry, if they've got a choice between buying something that is aquarium hardied and fragged in an aquarium, a lot of people will choose that over a natural one, especially if the price is right. It might not be as much money as we're making now, but if we want an industry, we want to be in the trade at all, then we have to do something, he says. Yep, couldn't agree more with Mr. Rick. Okay, export faces choppy waters. Australian international coral trade is also in trouble with fears it's not sustainable. Absolutely, fears. Fears and fear-mongering, mainly people that don't know. Maybe the people that read headlines like these stupid headlines and make you think that this is a bad industry. And you know what? Bad things happen. But Australia should be very proud of itself and the way that it conducts its industry. Now, in 2022, both the EU and UK issued ban on... You've already said that. Now you're saying it again. Now, I've looked at it, and they've got a ban on 5 species that probably don't travel well, and here you are trying to make that look like they're banning our corals. What a lie. The reality is they love our corals and they're happy to pay more for them because we do it well. We don't go and cyanide our reefs. We don't use dynamite. We don't use any of those techniques used overseas. We use net caught fish collection. We use sustainable one coral over here, one coral over there. And then the various collectors have got areas where they like to collect, and they don't want to remove all of a certain colour. They want it to be sustainable so they can keep collecting. And if they take a little bit here and a little bit there, it is sustainable. The UK has since loosened its restriction, but the EU remains like, this is just fear-mongering. Okay, at present, 20 Australian coral species are banned from import to the EU. Maybe that's true. I Googled 5, but if so be it. So what if there's 20 species they don't want? I think that's absolutely their business. But once again, there's hundreds and hundreds of species available. So the way that they're writing this makes it look like that's a thorn on us. It's not. It's probably just a good decision that they made for themselves. The EU says the reason for the restriction is insufficient evidence. The trade is sustainable. Probably also those particular species don't travel well to the EU. Mr. Squire insists the EU doesn't understand how the wild harvesting industry in Australia operates. Absolutely. The people that are concerned about this stuff generally know nothing about it. It's very easy to freak people out that don't know what they're talking about. Since 2016, the Great Barrier Reef has experienced 5 mass bleaching events, which occurred when the coral becomes stressed and turned white. Yes, it has. And if you go back to all of those reefs now, you will find they are all thriving. The corals bleach, they turn white. Then when the temperature's right, you lose some, but most of them take their zooanthellae back and go on thriving. Despite these increasingly common, devastating events, coral harvests have actually increased since 2018. Good. That is absolute credit to Australia as long as we keep doing it sustainably like we do. And if someone wants to prove that we can do things better, you know what? We will. So much so that Doctor felt he had to sound the alarm, calling for new limits on how much can be harvested back in 2021. All right, now let's get this straight. I think they said something like 1% of the reef is accessible to collectors and something like 1% of that is actually collected. So if you go doubling, tripling, 3 timesing, or halving what we collect, it makes no difference. It's like the gumball immigration. Let me just put that on. Right now, see this guy. Who's seen this? Immigration, world poverty, and gumballs. That's what we're talking about right now. What we can and do collect from the Great Barrier Reef is 1 gumball. What there is on the Great Barrier Reef is thousands of gumballs. So if you want to jump up and down, Doctor, about 1 gumball or 2 gumballs, good on you. But the reality is our industry is so tiny and our Great Barrier Reef is so big. So we're talking about removing pinches of sand from a bucket. It makes no difference. And if you haven't watched this video on world poverty and gumballs, this is brilliant. Here represents millions of people or thousands of people or whatever it is. And they're saying that if America takes that much, if we take 1 gumball or 2 gumballs, we don't make any difference to poverty. The only way you fix poverty is by fixing the country. The corruption and all the other problems are why the country is the way it is. But taking people into your country is like taking a gumball away from thousands of gumballs. In theory, it's great. In reality, it doesn't make any difference. So increasing or decreasing what we take is absolutely like a gumball compared to gumballs. It's like a pinch of sand out of a bucket. One of the concerns raised by Doctor was that coral species only found on the Great Barrier Reef could be over-harvested. Do you know what, Doctor? The one person that would be concerned about that would be the collectors. The collectors do not want to over-harvest something, meaning they can't harvest it again in the future. And when you meet Lyle Squire and these sorts of guys and you see the way they operate, not only will they make sure that they don't take all of their future profits, they'll try their best to propagate and grow those things in the wild, in the aquarium, so they don't even have to get them from the wild. So this is a totally true statement, but framed in a way that looks bad. But our industry is catering for all that. Popular reefer YouTubers have posted videos about how they like corals from Australia for their uniqueness, with a species known as scollies a favourite. Yes, Australian reefing is very respected and we have great corals and they are very well looked after, and that's why we are a prize to other countries. Now, according to 2024 assessment of the fisheries by the federal government department, scollies have been over-harvested by 17%. Okay, so if that's the case, then I bet you that something's going on about it. And you know what? The fact that we know how many percent it's been over-harvested for would mean that something is being done about it. Because our government puts rules in any time that there's a possibility of a problem. We get 10 new rules all the time. And so they actually have started cracking down on how much we're allowed to remove of certain corals. And if we do remove 17% per cent, 17%, you get 17%. Wow, that's really cheap. 17 of them for a cent. It's a really well written article. If considering I can barely read, what's this person's name anyway? Oh well, Angela. Right, Angela. If you lose your job because you can't write or research, you can have a job here cleaning my fish tanks. We're increasingly convinced that coral does not occur outside of a very small area of the Great Barrier Reef. So it's very vulnerable to overharvest, says Doctor. When I grew up, I used to swim, dive and snorkel around Bribey Island all the time. You never ever saw coral around there. Now, Bob Hawke, I used to look after his fish tanks, and he came up to me one day and he said, so is the coral reef dying? I said, no, Bob, the coral reef is not dying. The only thing the coral reef has ever done is move, evolve and change, and that's all it's doing. There has been some warmer temperatures, and the coral reef is coming south. It will move at a rate faster than you think. For example, last time I went swimming in Bribey Island, I saw so many varieties of coral, and I did not see them when I was a kid. And yes, I did look out for them, and I've always been passionate about coral, and you did not see the diversity of coral that you do now. Even swimming in Sydney, sometimes I see corals that there's no way would have been there before. The coral reef moves. It's all it's ever done. It's expanded, it's attracted, it's moved, and that's what it's doing. And when Bob Hawke asked me, is the coral reef dying? I said, no, Bob. The coral reef is just evolving, moving, and changing. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't look after it. We should do everything we can to look after it, but it will evolve. It was there way before us, and it will be there way after us. And I told Bob, the coral reef is slowly coming south. And Bob said to me, and where he lived, because I used to do his fish tank at Northbridge, and then he pointed down to his jetty and he said, so you're telling me that one day this could be a coral reef waterfront? I said, well, maybe. And then Bob went on to laugh and say, well, that's pretty good for Sydney tourism. Yeah, in millions of years, that might be right. Anyway, end of the day, the coral reef is moving, and the coral reef has abilities to survive and adapt way beyond our understanding. Those harvest levels are at unprecedented levels, okay? As long as it is sustainable. And if it isn't, it is the industry itself that will regulate it. While conducting the research in 2024 assessment, Doctor also noticed fewer colourful, smaller sized corals through the reef, subject to fishing when compared to unharvested reefs. Now, I don't know if I agree with that at all, but that's just his opinion, so good luck to you, dude. I reckon that when I've been out, I've seen, if anything, more beautiful corals. But once again, that's all someone's opinion, so whatever. We don't know what genetic attributes they're selecting when they are selecting these really bright, ultra master grade corals, he says. If they happen, for example, to be one that have the greatest thermal resistance, then we might leave that remaining population really compromised. Doctor believes stricter harvest limits may be warranted in some parts of the reef. Sure. If if they see evidence of problems, then closing certain parts of the reef would be a great idea. And you know what? A lot of the Great Barrier Reef is so massive, and there's so many reefs that the collectors don't want to keep going back to the same reefs all the time anyway, and they don't even have the capacity to go anywhere near all the reefs. So the collectors themselves already do that. So if someone banned a certain reef for a period of time, no one would be against that. If we find any issues of non-sustainability, then we are very interested as an industry, because we want to do it sustainably. That's why we all need to work on the same page, and we need to celebrate what a great job we're doing. We don't need to create scare campaigns that freak out the public and make them think we're doing the wrong thing when we're actually doing everything in our power to do the right thing. And the people not are getting in trouble. You need more information to effectively justify the ongoing harvest, let alone increased harvests, he says. He is calling on the industry to reinvest some of its profits into collecting data to demonstrate its sustainability. Well, there's massive amounts of data that are being collected by the collectors, and it's getting stricter and stricter with the data, and it's all going to the fisheries, so that is absolutely happening. But Mr. Squire says coral harvesters can't afford to do that. Yes, the universities and other people do all that stuff. It would cost hundreds of millions of dollars to be able to collect the level of detail in data in order to be able to say categorically whether or not the fishery is sustainable, he says. Now, Lyle knows the fishery is sustainable, and the amount of data that the fisheries is making people like Lyle collect is increasing more and more and more. And once again, the industry collects a huge amount of data for its capacity, and it should be applauded for what it does, not put down. Industry does not and will never make enough money to be able to support that research. That's right. Nor should they. The government and universities and so forth need to look at that, because every other industry they need to contribute, and the industry does contribute, but it's not actually the industry's responsibility. It is the lawmaker's responsibility to create laws to make sure that it's sustainable, and then for the industry to work within those laws. And I think that the Australian coral industry goes way above and beyond its responsibilities, and I think it should be applauded, and I think it does an excellent job. Now, Mr. Squire also sceptical of Doctor's report. Yeah, why wouldn't he be sceptical? Because if Mr. Doctor here is trying to reduce our gumballs, then, you know, we do have to be sceptical of it. Is he working on facts, or is he driven by ideology? He believes the research was conducted at a few sites and says visibility was limited during the dive. Yeah, I bet. So you go to a couple of reefs, make a couple of decisions, but this guy lives it. I wouldn't be trusting Mr. Doctor that might go and do a few trips. You want to trust the people that live and breathe it. They can't say with any level of certainty that it isn't sustainable. They can't say with any level of certainty it is sustainable. Yep. Because the amount of data that we need to show it was sustainable is very high, but the level of data that we need to show it isn't sustainable is evident. Because, once again, if you can dive on one single atoll for 17 years and see no impact, then they would need a lot more data to show it isn't sustainable. So it's very easy to say you need data to show it is sustainable, but you know what? You'd need more data to show it isn't. Because from everything I can see, everything points to the fact that, by and large, the Australia's coral reef is completely sustainable. Even when the reef is in the midst of a bleaching event, the industry is allowed to continue harvesting coral. Of course, because they don't go to the bleached areas to harvest. The coral reef is absolutely massive. It goes up the length of Queensland. They are only able to fish off a very limited number of reefs. So therefore, if there's a bleaching event in one area, they go to another area that's not bleached. This article is doing its best to make absolutely excellent management look bad. The industry has a voluntary action plan for coral bleaching and says it's careful to minimise its impact on the reef. But the federal government has previously said voluntary efforts are no longer considered adequate. Yes, the industry does have that. And yes, the industry is very concerned about where it collects from. And why would the industry go to a coral bleached area to get coral when it can just go somewhere else that's not bleached? It just doesn't even make sense. They try to make a good point look bad. Discussions between the industry and authorities are ongoing, with harvesters hoping to avoid a total lockout. Absolutely. Now, why would we lock out a potentially very sustainable industry? At worst, they could reduce, which they've recently done anyway, reduce the quotas. Once again, if you want to take one gumball out of there and put it back there, do you think it makes any difference? If there's natural problems and the reef wipes out, do you think having that gumball there is going to make any difference to all the gumballs that are wiped out if there is some sort of natural disaster? This is just scaremongering. The quotas set out for Queensland coral fisheries are strict. Yes, they are very strict. Going over quota or fishing in an area you shouldn't will result in legal consequences. Absolutely, yes, it does, and it should. In 2016, the first ever prosecution for illegal coral harvesting on the Great Barrier Reef since its new rezoning in 2003 occurred in Gladstone against divers working for the coral harvester Ausreef Connections. Yep. A pair of divers had been caught fishing for corals in a green zone where fishing was not permitted. Good. That happened and they got in trouble. Excellent. Since then, there have been 23 prosecutions relating to 10 cases of illegal collection. Excellent. So people are getting in trouble, and you know what? 10 cases, considering collectors go out every day and do the right thing, the ones doing the wrong thing are getting in trouble, and I think that's great. The most recent case is allegedly illegal coral harvesting involving coral collector Giardini, including its director Jason, who currently holds 5 licenses. The harvester are charged with fishing for coral in the area where practice is prohibited. All right, if Jason gets in trouble, sorry, Jace, if you did the wrong thing, you did the wrong thing. Doctor says cases of illegal harvesting puts the social license of the industry on the line. Yes, I agree with one thing Doctor says. That's why we as an industry must do everything we can to protect what we've got and do it legally. That's why there are groups like the PIAA, and we promote sustainability and we promote legal. It is absolutely not fair to the people that do it legally when there are people that do it illegally. And if they get in trouble, well, that's the risk they take. But you can't say that it is a bad industry because there's a couple of bad people. All the discussions we're having about whether you should allow coral fishing full stop is further tipped forward. These guys are cowboys and we should get rid of them anytime there is any breaches of compliance, he said. Mr. Squire says that sort of behaviour is disgraceful. Correct. Because Mr. Squire does everything he can to do things legally. And when people do things illegally, not only is it disgraceful, but it risks the good work of people like Mr. Squire. This is just more and more evidence that our industry is something we should be proud of, and the people running our industry have the right intention. This article could easily be rewritten with all the same information, but praising the wonderful work of the Australian coral industry. This gives us an incredibly bad name, particularly when we're putting forward these voluntary initiatives. Yes, the future of the industry, when Doctor says that the Queensland coral fishery has been approved by the federal government department in 2024 for a further 3 years, he was surprised. Why would you be surprised, Doctor? What, because a few people do the wrong thing, and because you can't even prove that what we are doing is not sustainable? So why you'd be surprised when the federal government made a very calculated decision is interesting. You can see that there's evidence of the fisheries impact in this report. What, your report? So he's just backed up his own claim with his own report. But the government disagreed, yes, because you do one report on a reef that you went to, and then you roll it out and decide that that represents the whole industry, when obviously it doesn't. Big surprise, Doctor. But the government disagreed. Of course it disagreed, because you weren't taking everything into consideration. The federal government department and minister says the way coral harvested were operating were not likely to threaten any relevant ecosystem, including but not limited to habitat and biodiversity. Yes, correct. Thank you, Minister. Doctor says the only way to recover the vulnerable species identified in his assessment was to stop harvesting them from affected reefs. Okay, cool. The industry would totally support that, Doctor. If you turn around and tell us what are the species that are vulnerable, the industry itself would regulate its behaviour, because the industry itself cares about the coral reef more than you care about headlines. The federal government department has requested a review of the at-risk coral species to be submitted in August. Yes, and it constantly does that stuff, and that's part of why we are the best fishery, because we look into things and we make decisions on facts, not individual reports. The Government Department of Primary Industry says it has begun to review and will incorporate the findings from Doctor's assessment. Mr. Squire believes current limits on those species are sufficient, and the harvesters will look after the reef. Yes, it is guys like that that care the most, and it is guys like that that will look after the reef. The industry on its own goes about trying to limit the take of those species. Yes, when this guy sees that there's an issue with the species, he will be the one that will stop collecting, because he wants to be able to collect it in the future. The DPI says an updated ecological risk assessment and harvest strategy will be completed. For now, the world's aquarists can still treat themselves to a piece of the Great Barrier Reef right in their living room. Good, just like they should. For Doctor, this presents an irony. Good on you, Doctor. Go looking for other headlines. There's fundamental imperative for both sides of the government to try to restore the reef, he said. Yes, we want to restore it using the industry, and we want to do it on fact, not on scare headlines. There's no point restoring the reef if they're also simultaneously taking more coral out than you can possibly ever put back. Absolutely, but that's not what's happening. When you look at the sheer size of the coral reef and you look at the tiny little bit that's collected, we're talking about gumballs, you gumbo. For Mr. Squire says that's irrelevant, because restoration doesn't happen in areas where they harvest. Absolutely. I think everything Lyle and everything from the industry has said in this is excellent. The only thing is the reporter is trying to make it all look bad and trying to use Mr. Doctor Headline Grabber and to make this article look bad, when if you actually look and dissect what it's saying, is actually the industry should be proud of itself. That question of restoring the reef is also making the presumption that the reef is in such a point that it needs restoration. That's right. At the moment, our reef is still in pretty good shape. Our reef is in excellent shape because guys like this do a great job with their sustainable collection. And people that do the wrong thing get in trouble. And Australia should be very, very proud of what is going on in the Great Barrier Reef and the way that we collect. And these people should be very proud of what they're doing. Anyway, so if you read this without having an understanding of the industry and you looked at this grumpy looking fellow, you would think bad things about our industry. But if you actually stop and look at what's being said, the long and short of it is that Australia exports $25 million of a natural resource, but it's done completely sustainable by people that care under a highly regulated system that catches people that are doing the wrong thing. So I think Australia should be very proud of itself. I think the people in this industry, by and large, should be very proud of themselves. And this article should be rewritten to reflect what the people are actually saying. He doesn't look happy. Dumped minister. No wonder he doesn't look happy. All right, well, anyway, dissecting this article and reading all of it, the long and short of it is that we should be very proud of Australia as Australians. We should be proud of what's going on in the Great Barrier Reef. We should continue to do better. We should continue to get data and monitor. And we should keep doing exactly what we're doing because we are leading the world and we should be proud.